Dr. Alan Williams is somebody I consider a dear friend and a force in the regenerative agriculture movement. His experience in the academic world, as well as being a very experienced farmer himself, he's been able to teach a lot of people, and it's made a huge difference. So between understanding ag, the new Regenified certification, it's a big deal. So we get into why regenerative agriculture is such an important thing, and maybe even you clear up a couple of misconceptions. Dr. Williams, I am so excited to be visiting with you again, my friend. You have been a force for a long time in this regenerative agriculture movement, but what I appreciate about you is that we can take it a step further, because sometimes I get too deep into the weeds, into the health side, especially with my focus on cancer, that, sometimes I can lose people. And so I wanted to get back with you after visiting with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet into the health side of things, and why this regenerative agriculture is sincerely and genuinely a huge boost to the health.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be back. Very happy to be chatting with you again, and looking forward to our discussion today. There is a lot that's happening in the world of regenerative food, and I'm really happy to be sharing that with your listeners.
Oh, I love it. I love it. All right, so let's get into first that grass-fed has degrees on what that means to the end product. So can you explain what y'all are finding out with, I guess, is it the Utah State is kind of the main one leading this up. What are you finding out in the meat, the end products, depending on the degree of grazing in regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, so, the actual diet that the animals are consuming during that time before harvest is critically important. And that diet can be different, for different animals, just like it is for animals that are in a feedlot, on what would now be considered a conventional or traditional, feedlot finishing ration. That's not all the same either. It varies from feedlot to feedlot to feedlot. So when people think that all grain-fed beef is the same and has the same nutrient density and properties, it doesn't. But neither does grass-fed. And with the work that we're doing with Dr. Van Vliet, we're discovering that more and more. Now, some may view that as, oh my goodness, this makes it even harder for me to select what I want to choose to eat. But actually, no, it doesn't. It actually allows us to know much more about what to ask for, okay, in the meat that we eat, in foods that we select. So I'm going to give you the two keys, okay, right off the bat, and then we can talk about that and what they really mean. So, I've been working with Dr. Van Vliet for quite some time now, and we've done ongoing research on farm after farm, ranch after ranch. And what we are absolutely very clearly finding is that there are two keys to phytonutrient-rich proteins. One is biologically active soils, and we can dig into what that really means. And the other is plant species diversity. So the more plants and different types of plants they consume in their diet, the more phytonutrient rich that end product is going to be. And this sort of flies in the face of many of the things that farmers and ranchers have been taught. And we can talk about that as well, and why sometimes this is so difficult for farmers and ranchers themselves to grasp.
So Alan, let's dive into that because I know a lot of farmers, at least in my area, really push for like a Bermuda rich pasture. Like it's almost monocropping for a certain type of grass, right? And then we can compare that to some other more natural farmland or natural prairies, right? That have extreme diversity with different forbs and even, shrubs and saplings and everything else going in there. So can you break down what you have seen on those two extremes?
Absolutely. So when you talk about low diversity pastures or even monoculture pastures, such as the Bermuda pasture that you mentioned, um, the fact of the matter is that those animals are eating a very low diversity diet, so they are being nutrient limited themselves in their finishing diet. And they are especially being phytonutrient limited themselves
Hmm.
in their own diet. And when we have a monoculture or low diversity, inevitably the biology in the soil is going to be limited as well. So it means that we're going to have soils that are less than superior in the biological diversity and functioning. And it means that their diet is very narrow. And just like us as humans, we really, for optimal health, we should eat a fairly diverse diet uh, or eat diets that are certainly phytonutrient rich in a whole array of phytonutrients. These animals need that same thing. They're no different. And when we limit their diet, then guess what? We're limiting the degree of nutrition that we are consuming as well.
And I think that that's kind of evident when you watch just like a cow be a cow, right? Like they'll go to an oak tree. I see them eat oak leaves all the time. I see them go through and pick out different things that they need, and there's an innate ability to know what they need when you allow the animal to be the animal. So because I have so many kind of one off that'll come when you or Gabe or Joel see the farming side of it and kind of lose them on the health side. Let's go into a little bit like what is a phytonutrient and what does that do within the consumer?
So, very good question. And so, simply put, phytonutrients are chemicals within foods, and let's not misinterpret that word chemical. Okay, I mean we're actually talking about very good things here, but they are chemicals within foods that have very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. And what are the two things that are the drivers of either good health or poor health? If we're consuming a lot of antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, that is absolutely the driver to good health. But if we are lacking those in our diet, then over time we are going to experience health issues. It's absolutely inevitable. So phytonutrients are the compounds that we must have in our daily diet to be able to consistently consume these antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. And these phytonutrients also consist of the array of fatty acids. And so I think almost everybody knows about omega 3s, and the benefit of consuming omega 3s in our diet. I think a lot of people have probably heard now about CLAs or conjugated linoleic acids and another fatty acid that's critically important in our diet. These omega 3s and CLAs as fatty acids have powerful cardiovascular health properties. They help prevent things such as diabetes and cancers. They help fight obesity in humans, and they also help prevent neurological disorders, and particularly things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and so forth. They're very, very powerful in helping to prevent those types of disorders and maladies in humans. So we really need consumption of these phytonutrients and a broad array of phytonutrients on a daily basis.
And so, like a lot of the phytonutrients, a lot of people would be familiar with are things like resveratrol, curcumin, berberine, a lot of these compounds that are typically thought of as plant-based that we take, and they have these health benefits, right? That's well known, and there's a wide array. But what I think is fascinating in the context of our conversation is phytonutrients are also found in animals that eat a diverse diet in all the ruminants, right? So this is my rules for or guidelines for what we eat. Okay, it's local, it's seasonal, it's natural, right? Mm-hmm. So local means it grows where you are. And then we've got seasonal. It grows at the time of the season based on latitude and climate, temperature, whatever we've got going on. It's seasonal. And then the natural. That means it's not covered in some synthetic chemical. It's not a genetically modified organism. It's natural. It's as close to God made it as we can get. Why are those rules not good for animals?
See, that's exactly the point. And they are. And animals need these phytonutrients as much as we do if we want them to be healthy. And here's the deal. We are now seeing more livestock and more of our pets that are suffering from modern American human diseases and maladies. And the reason why they are now suffering from some of these same diseases and maladies that we are is because we have forced upon them the same crappy diet that we're eating, that are lacking phytonutrients. So they desperately need those. And if we can eat plants that are rich in phytonutrients and that benefits us in our bodies, why in the world do we think that those phytonutrients aren't passed through those proteins, that meat, those eggs, that milk, and all of that into our diet as well? Well, of course they are. And the work that Dr. Van Vliet has been doing has proven that. These phytonutrients are there in very high quantities and even more importantly, rapidly absorbable forms, that when we eat these eggs or drink that milk or eat that beef that's phytonutrient rich, our bodies can rapidly absorb those phytonutrients and use them.
Yeah. So I just the other day talked to Mark McAfee. He's got the largest, I guess, dairy in the country out in California. And Mark was he's pretty upset about some of the stuff that's going on around the raw dairy. And he said, this is basically farming versus the pharmaceutical world right now. And so we've got to embrace our food as medicine. And I think that is so important. But there's another aspect to it that I have been absolutely blown away. And it's caused me to kind of go down this deep, that quantum rabbit trail that we were talking about before we started recording. The light is unbelievably important. So all life on Earth is dependent on light. And, photosynthesis is the kind of the start of all that. And so we're able to capture all of this through the food. But another aspect of understanding the circadian biology of all this is DHA. And so something recently that it just hit me in the face with, because it's actually in our eyes and it sets the circadian rhythm with the light, and if you see the sunrise and all this good stuff. But when I talked to Van Vliet, we're always told DHA salmon. Well, it just ancestrally, Alan, didn't make any sense to me, because not everybody in the world would have been able to eat salmon. So I was like, there's got to be another source. Sheep are like the salmon of the land. I've been absolutely blown away with the level of DHA in completely regenerative grass-fed sheep. So with that said, all these weeds and stuff that we're seeing, right, in pastures are the perfect food for sheep that are the highest land-based option of having DHA. So nature made no mistakes. God made no mistakes, in my opinion, and I think that that is an aspect. It's a niche in there that layers this, right. And so, like, what may not be the perfect food for cow in nature would have been, or a bison, right, would have been perfect for an antelope or a deer or an elk or something. And in the context of agriculture, that's where we bring in these other styles of ruminants. So what have y'all found around the DHA and the multi-species grazing?
Yeah, so I'm very glad you went there with that. And, one of the things that we have absolutely found is that the more forbs that our livestock eat, again, in many of those plants, farmers and ranchers call weeds now. They've been taught to call them a weed. Those forbs are super rich in phytonutrients. And sheep naturally seek after and eat more forbs than cattle do. And therefore, given the opportunity, given the ability to have diverse pastures that have a high forb component to them, then, sheep are consuming a lot of these forbs and therefore getting a lot of those phytonutrients in their diet. And that translates into the lamb that we eat. Now, the good news is that we can teach our cattle, whether they're dairy cows or beef cows or whatever, and other livestock species, to eat these forbs as well. And the same thing holds true. If they're eating these forbs, just like when the sheep eat these forbs, then that translates into the beef and into the milk. And this is also a reason why we move our chickens and our other poultry species so frequently onto fresh paddocks or pasture, is because what we have found is that they really love those forbs as well. And those are some of the plants that these poultry species, whether they're chickens or turkeys or whatever, are going to go after as soon as you put them in a fresh pasture. And when you eat those eggs, for instance, out of those laying hens that are moved daily on pasture, it's phenomenal. The color of the yolk is a deep orange, so you can see it right away. You can see the difference immediately. You taste the difference immediately, and your body tells you. You feel the difference very quickly after consuming eggs produced that way. But herein lies the rub, okay? As farmers and ranchers for several decades now, we have been taught weeds are bad and we need to get rid of them, get them out of our pastures. So like you brought up earlier, the guy with the predominantly Bermuda grass pastures has been taught, hey, maintain them as Bermuda grass and spray a herbicide if any weeds or forbs are trying to grow there to keep them out of there. That's the wrong thing to do. And again, when we look at the composition of native grasslands and prairies around the world, and particularly here in North America, but anywhere in the world, they were comprised of often 200 to 300 plus different plant species. And when you look at the composition between the groups of plants, the classes of plants, the grasses, the forbs, and the legumes, it never was 80, 90 to 100% grasses. Almost always our native prairies and grasslands had at least 30, 40 to even 50% forb component. And so the bison of old, the elk of old, the antelope of old, the deer of old, and so forth, ate this remarkably diverse diet. And therefore, the indigenous peoples, including Native Americans and all that, never had the diseases that are common to the average American today. Those diseases were unknown to the Native American populations. And when they did kill a bison or an elk or an antelope or whatever it is, what were the first things they ate from that
Right.
animal. They ate the organ meats and the fat. Okay. And the most vulnerable in the tribe were given the organ meats and the fats out of those animals. And as a matter of fact, the leanest meats they didn't even eat. Okay. They threw that to the dogs. They threw it to the dogs. And yet, what are we taught today? Oh, avoid the organs, avoid the fat, and eat only the leanest of lean cuts. That's what's, quote, healthy. Well, no, that's devoid of absolutely everything that we need in our diet, including these phytonutrients.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there. I think that when we look at the work of Weston A. Price, I think he laid it out perfectly and went through the world studying this and showing it. And I think, another component to modern day health, I fully believe now is also it's going to be technology and lighting. As I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but that has such a massive impact. And they were always outside, right? They were always outside in contact with the ground. All that matters, the food. And so it really is, in my view, a combination of all of it. But we are so far removed for everything that you just laid out and then live in an artificial world. And I think that this is a perfect segue to compare the chickens you were talking about versus a broiler farm. We've got artificial light. We've got, fluorinated water. We've got all of these things that are completely opposite of what nature would have in animals. So when we look at the parallels, I, it's honestly, it's astonishing to me. And again, cancer is my world. The whole reason I do this podcast is what are the fundamental aspects to where we can overcome cancer and chronic disease. And food is a massive part of that. It's absolutely huge. And so, Alan, I want us to dive into a little bit of what I feel like you're super well versed in, especially as far as the farmers go, and that is the genetic side of it, the epigenetic side of it, because I think that when we start bridging these gaps, right, like Gabe probably wouldn't want to have this conversation with me, but you, on the other hand, will. So when we look at how genes are expressed, I want to hear more from you on the animal side of it. When genes are expressed in cattle and other ruminants, what does that mean for the listener?
Yeah. So let's start, I guess, with just offering up a definition for your listeners of epigenetics and a brief analogy to help them understand how epigenetics works. I think most people understand genetics, but epigenetics is really what influences everything and influences the reality, even for us. Okay. So epigenetics is defined as the influence of environmental factors on the degree of expression of the genes that control our bodies. Okay. So think of it like this. Think of it like a light switch. Yeah, I can install a light switch that either turns lights 100% off or 100% on, and there's no in between. I flick it on, and the lights are on. I flick the light switch off, and the lights go off. Right? Well, that's genetics. Okay, but epigenetics is this. It would be analogous to installing a dimmer switch on that light switch. So now when I turn the lights on, I can have those lights 20% on, 50% on, 80% on, in any degree between 0 and 100, right? That's what epigenetics does. And it does it to us. It does it to all the animals that we're raising. It does it to all the crops that we're raising, and even to the wildlife around us. So everything that we do, if we're out here, using herbicides and fungicides and parasiticides and so forth, we're influencing epigenetics and everything that those come into contact with. So our crops, all the plants we eat, our animals, and us. So they're in epigenetic selection is both in the plants we grow to eat and the livestock we raise to eat, are critically important. And they're critically important to the resilience and the health of those crops or those livestock. And they are critically important to our resilience and our health. So, really, we need to be core focused on epigenetics, not just pure genetics. And this is something that every geneticist even needs to understand.
That is beautiful. That is a great analogy. I think another way of looking at that is like our genes are the gun and the environment pulls the trigger, right? And so one thing that I've had a very hard time getting people to accept or understand is that the genes don't dictate your health. You don't have
Right.
cancer because your parents had cancer. You don't have a bad knee because your parents had bad knee. Now, are we more susceptible to certain things? Say, we've got a P53, that's the cancer suppression gene. Is there a variation there? Well, that can be, but it's that environment, right? Whether that's the light, whether that's the chemicals, whether that's whatever. I think a lot of times we live such similar lifestyles that the chronic diseases manifest in a similar way, and it looks like it's directly related to genetics, but it's really that environment. So in that context, what have you seen with, just slightly getting off of the diet, with water? What is the implication of water quality with livestock, say from a spring versus municipal water?
This is something that is absolutely coming more and more in focus for us and that we're dealing with. Water has become a huge issue, especially quality water that is free of contaminants. Yeah, and so unfortunately, both us and our livestock and even our crops are being exposed to water that has high levels of contaminants in it. And these contaminants range from, synthetic fertilizers, nitrates, and phosphates that have leached into our water, from the herbicides, fungicides, insecticides that have leached into our water, parasiticides, all of that, even to the microplastics and those types of things. So we're finding more and more and more of those that are present, and we're also finding more heavy metals, that are present in our waters. So these are things that we are becoming increasingly concerned about for human water consumption, but also for animal consumption. So animals need healthy water and clean water and pure water as much as we do. And if they're not getting that, just like it can negatively impact our health, well, obviously it's going to negatively impact their health. And so just like when we have our animals outside, like they are intended to be, okay, and they are getting that sunshine every day, they're being moved to fresh pasture every day, regardless of the species, and they are eating this highly diverse, clean diet, and they are drinking clean water, they're going to be healthy. There's no need for subtherapeutic antibiotics in their water or feed. There's no need for all of these amendments and other supplements that we've now been taught as livestock producers you just absolutely have to have. All of that goes away because they no longer have a need for all of that supplementation. And you see it in their health, in their resilience, in their longevity. Just like you see it in our health, resilience, and longevity.
One thing that comes to mind on the water is that one of the farmers I work with, he has he's kind of down South Arkansas, right at the foothills of the Ouachita Mountains, and one thing that kept popping up was the processor was like, the livers on your grass-fed, grass-finished animals are absolutely pristine. It's even different than any
Mm.
other of the grass-fed, grass-finished that I've seen. Like, what are you doing? He's like, man, the only thing I can think of is the water, right? It's just spring water. It's where pretty close to like where Mountain Valley. I think everybody's seen those green Mountain Valley bottles. It's pretty close to the same water, and just if water makes that big of an effect on the liver, I think that's really telling on the health of the animal. And I don't think that water is this inert substance that we think of, because,
Yeah.
Alan, as we've gone into looking into the mitochondria actually, they don't just produce ATP, right? The main thing they do is produce water and CO2. That's what mitochondria do. And so when we're producing internal water that's deuterium depleted, that's a big deal. Like, that's a really big deal. It may go over the heads of a lot of us that have just focused on agriculture, but water is such an important topic. And so if you look at Frank Schallenberger, for example, that's some people may think that's kind of woo, but he was one of the first ones that really dove into the water being different. And so like the natural spring is something that I'm going back to with Van Vliet. He said there was a ranch up in Idaho, I believe, that had the phytonutrients off the charts. And so one thing that I was trying to tie in there, I wonder how much the water played into the diversity of those forages.
Well, it plays a huge role, and again, we're seeing that more and more. And the largest aquifer in North America, you know, the Ogallala aquifer is under serious stress now and is being rapidly depleted, and we are seeing crops that are suffering more and more now, that are being grown in these Midwest states where that aquifer is so critically important. Uh, the crops are losing their resilience. Okay. And when you look at the phytonutrient content of those crops, it is depleting very rapidly. And again, it's because their source of water is now contaminated, and it's because we have so depleted the aquifer that there's no dilution there anymore from all of the contaminants that are running off of many of our farm fields. And so what water is there now is becoming more and more concentrated in these contaminants. And then that water is being used to irrigate crops, and it's being used for livestock to drink. Now, what do we think is going to happen here?
I think that's why we've got to focus on the hydrology cycle so much more. And, Ray told me, I said, if you were the Secretary of Ag for Arkansas, what would you do? And his answer was like, basically just cover the ground. I think that's what we do. How do we get the aquifers to fill back up? Well, we got to quit evaporating everything that hits the ground, right? And so I think that's where your work in regenerative farming have a, even deeper meaning, like its potential to what's going to save us, right? Save our country, because the desertification that's going on based off of the conventional farming practices are putting us at a really bad place, a really, really bad place. But one more thing, Alan, that are y'all looking into like minerals content of the meat with Dr. Van Vliet? Is that something? Because as I look into human health, magnesium, iodine, copper, selenium, all of these are epically important. And when we look at what is quote unquote the source that we should have for, say, copper, that's liver. We're finding very, very limited to even no copper in liver. So that's kind of scary if our natural food that's supposed to provide it isn't there. So what are you seeing on the mineral side of all of this?
Yeah, so what's happening there is that there's a soil test called a TND, for total nutrient digestion, that allows us to be able to do a complete extraction of minerals in the soil to see what is really there. Now, a standard soil test only reveals the minerals in the soil that are immediately plant available. Okay, so there's a big difference between the two tests. So I shared that to share this. We are absolutely seeing a severe lack of minerals being absorbed by our plants from the soil, and also a lack of minerals in our water. Okay. So both are being depleted in terms of their mineral status. Now, why? The why is because we have all of that is mediated by the soil microbial population. So the T&D tests have shown us, we've done hundreds of thousands of these all over North America, and we have not once found a soil that is truly deficient in any mineral. Okay. Rather, these minerals are bound, they're tied up. What those soils are deficient in is an active microbial population that can then make those minerals bioavailable to the plants for uptake. Okay. And so by not protecting our soil and keeping it covered with living roots and green plants, we are causing this depletion and binding of minerals to accelerate very rapidly. And so you are right, and Ray is right. The solution is very simple. The solution is keep the soil covered with living plants year round. That's the solution. And when we do that, that feeds the biology in the soil that then goes to work releasing these bound minerals, okay, so that these plants can then take them up. So problem solved. That's the real solution to the problem. But here's the deal. It's too simple, okay? That solution doesn't make billions of dollars for major corporations. It doesn't get politicians' votes, okay? And it doesn't keep politicians in power. So that's the problem with that solution. It is so simple and so easy that everybody wants to sweep it under the rug. And that bothers me, because we can solve, look, the problems we have currently with our health, with the health of our soil, the health of our ecosystems, and the health of our client are truly easily solved if we just do that one thing. Okay. Let me share with you a couple of real quick examples here. So I was on some farms in Delaware a couple of weeks ago, working with some farmers on a major project. And these are row crop farmers. And on one of these farms, and this particular farmer is just beginning to dive into regenerative practices. Okay. So he was doing a few trials. So he had some corn where he let a cover crop of cereal rye grow to maturity, and then he no-till drilled that corn into that. And he confided in me. He said, that scared me to death, because that mat of ryegrass was so thick. I didn't think my corn seed was going in the ground, and I didn't think corn would come up. And then he had the rest of the field done the way he's always done it, so going in there, and, the ground was pretty bare, and the corn was seeded into that. Okay. More conventional field prep. Okay. Well, on the day that I was there, it was 85 degrees. Okay. 85 degrees. And air temperature. The soil temperature where he had planted the corn conventionally, and the soil was bare and exposed around the corn plants, was 124 degrees on an 85-degree day. The soil temperature where he had basically rolled down the cereal rye cover crop and planted the corn into that was just 74 degrees. Okay. So a
Huge.
dramatic difference in soil temperature. The soil that was bare and exposed where the corn was planted had a thick crust on the layer and was cracking open. So it wasn't functional. The biology wasn't functioning there, and the water cycle was not functioning there. Where he had the cover crop rolled down and where it was 73 degrees, the soil was still moist instead of being dry and crusty and cracked. And there was tons of earthworm activity there. And there were so many earthworm castings that I pointed that out to him. I said, "Oh my gosh, look at all these earthworm castings." And he was like, and now keep in mind, this is a multi-generational farmer, been farming his whole life. He said, "What does an earthworm casting look like?" Okay.
Wow.
Been farming his whole life, did not know what an earthworm casting looked like. And I showed them to him. And then I said, "Oh, by the way, do you know that these castings are rich in natural nitrogen?" And he said, "Really?" And I grabbed up a handful of them and I scrunched them up in my hand and I smelled them. And then I said, "Here, smell this." And I said, "What does that smell like?" He said, "Wow, that smells like nitrogen." I said, "Yes, absolutely." And the bulbs just started going off for him, right? The light bulbs. And so what he thought was going to be a problem turned out to be his biggest asset, just simply protecting the soil, protecting the moisture, protecting the temperature. And again, a 50 darn degree difference in soil temperature just 50 feet away in the same field.
That's huge. That's absolutely massive. I think, prior to that story, you made the perfect argument against glyphosate, because it chelates minerals. It is an antimicrobial. It kills all of it. And so if we're using something that is as toxic as glyphosate and we're not able to get those minerals and we're absolutely killing the diversity of microbial life, that's a big problem. And something that I don't know if you have seen, Dr. Stephanie Seneff hypothesizes that the glyphosate is actually getting into proteins and displacing the amino acid glycine, which is a huge problem. And so as we know, how proteins fold tells how they do the job. And if they're not able to fold properly and they can't do their job, nothing works. And I think that glyphosate is a massive problem that I don't think as bad as people think it is, I don't think they've even seen the tip of the iceberg, honestly. And so what you're doing with Regenified, y'all's whole group, is something that I have tried to just, get behind as much as I possibly can and get out there, because it's reducing the negatives of the corporatocracy that's really running our country. And then it's building up more of this resilient food system that goes back to my whole point at the beginning of those guidelines around dietary health. It's local, seasonal, and natural. So what are y'all doing now with the Regenified? What's next for y'all? Because that is so exciting that we've got to have some sort of a unified label, so to speak, that we can get behind. And I'm so excited that the Ralstons have jumped on here in Arkansas with the rice. So what's going on with Regenified right now?
Well, it's been a whirlwind. And not just here in the U.S., but globally. The interest and attention has grown radically. We actually have a huge backlog of farms that need verification that it's difficult to get to right now because we need more qualified verifiers. So, hey, anyone out there that wants to become a Regenified verifier, contact us. Okay. We're looking, we're hiring, we need you. This is something that has really taken off. And the reason why is because, as you know, Logan, you cannot start a farmer just cold turkey. They have been taught to be so reliant on all of these herbicides and fungicides and parasiticides and all that. We can keep naming stuff, right? That they have been taught to be so reliant on, and the synthetic fertility and everything else, that if we try to make them change in midstream cold turkey, they're going to have complete train wrecks. Yeah. And they're no longer going to be able to afford to farm. So we intentionally designed Regenified so that we can walk them through that process step by step, and we can step them down from their reliance on glyphosate, the Roundups of the world. We can step them down from their reliance on fungicides and their reliance on synthetic fertilities and so forth, to the point that they no longer need those things. Okay. And that's exactly what we're finding, that once you achieve a certain level of diversity and biology in your soils, those inputs really are not necessary anymore. I mean, I'm a living example of that. You can come to our farm any day of the week, and you will not find any synthetic fertilizers on our farm, any chemicals on our farm. And why? It's because we just simply don't need them anymore. And that's what we're helping people do. We're helping them walk through that step-by-step journey. It's sort of the agricultural's world equivalent of, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We're doing the 12-step program, so to speak, to step them down. But that's important. A lot of people keep saying, oh, no, you got to stop all of it immediately. And the problem is, if you're saying that, you don't understand agriculture and farming at all. And you don't understand that 80% of your food will go away overnight. Okay. Yeah. So this ability to be able to scale down from their reliance on that and scale up in their regenerative practices is so critical. So we intentionally designed Regenified to do just that, to be scalable, to allow them to start wherever they are at and work towards that ultimate goal of being able to completely eliminate their reliance on these inputs. That's where we want to get people.
Well, it's beautiful, and what y'all are doing is working. I've got to give a shout out to my buddy and partner, Justin McHouston. He has bought in all the way, everything that Understanding Ag's doing, loves the Regenified. He's actually the one that sent me the podcast that you and Van Vliet recently did. Justin's raising lamb and beef. He's following y'all's practices, actually sending samples to Van Vliet to have all of it analyzed, so we know if we're actually doing the right things. And so just thank you for all the work you've done, the whole team, everything, being sincere. I guess the vast majority of y'all wonderful humans, and I'm glad to be able to call you a friend.
Well, and the same here, and thank you for the voice you are providing, because that's absolutely critical. The greater awareness we can create out there, then the faster progress we all can make. We need, the honest truth is, Logan, we need as many consumers out there as possible demanding foods that are produced regeneratively. Okay, that's going to change. If they really want to change the minds of farmers and ranchers in terms of what they do, then, we need consumers to say, if you do this, I'll buy those foods. Okay. Absolutely. I'm hunting for that. And that is certainly what we have found. And on our own farm, as we make this information available to the people that buy from us, that buy our beef, our lamb, our pork, our eggs, or whatever, they love the fact that we can provide this nutritional information. And they love the fact that we are raising our animals in a way, all of our animals in a way that allows them to be very healthy, very resilient, and that we're building ecosystems. Another beautiful thing, Logan, I guess, about what is happening here is that way too many people have the belief that farming and ranching and wildlife have to be separate. But what we're clearly proving is that on regenerative farms and ranches, we are building incredibly complex, diverse, and healthy ecosystems and providing this habitat for all types of wildlife. So we are actually seeing wildlife return in huge numbers to these regenerative farms and ranches. So it's a win, win, win across the board.
It really, really is. And I think so, owning a farmer's market, owning a grocery store, I'm very much into that retail and marketing side of all of this. And I think that we've got to have a lot more of that. And it makes it really hard on a larger commercial scale to work with the Walmarts of the world on this whole local seasonal natural type. And I think that we've got to have these mom and pop retail shops. I think that's key. And what, Texas Slim is doing with the beef initiative, trying to do that, focusing on that retail side, I think he's doing great. But when you look at the health side of everything, that it's so big. And I think, talk to Dr. Brooke Miller about the carnivore diet, and he's big into the beef side of things. And I think that when you experience what we've been told is not accurate, right? To avoid meat, avoid fat, that's going to kill you and cause heart disease. We've seen that not be right with the carnivore movement, like at all. But then when you have the backing up of these phytonutrients and other compounds that are actually anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, and doing all that, I think all of it is coming together. I mean, it makes too much sense, but I think that's also the ball is in our court as the entrepreneurs in this food system to execute and deliver and be consistent and do a good job of educating and explaining. So I think we're all in this together. I think we got a lot of work to do, but we got a lot of amazing people. And again, just thank you, because we rely on you. I send people your direction all the time, just based off of you can learn this very easily with people that can give you the advice that works with understanding ag.
Absolutely. And, we're here, and we would love to have anybody contact us at any time to help them on their journey. This is really what it's all about, I have a simple 5-word definition for stewardship. And it is this: it is caring for all God's creation. And nothing more needs to be said. That encompasses absolutely everything that we can imagine. But that's really what this is about. If we are really good stewards, the stewards that we're called to be, then all of these problems go away.
That's beautiful. I think that is the perfect way to end, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me again, and get ready to see y'all whenever y'all make it to Arkansas.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.